Welcome to Franchise Focus. I'm Laura Blackmore, your host, and a franchise consultant with over a decade experience in franchising. Franchising isn't one size fits all, and this podcast helps focus on what truly matters. Each week, we pull back the curtain with top industry experts, whether you're exploring your first franchise or expanding your portfolio. Let's dive in. Welcome to Franchise Focus. I'm your host, Laura Blackmore, and today we're diving into one of the most recognized names in home services, Benjamin Franklin Plumbing. I'm joined by Tommy Ewing, Franchise Development Manager at Authority Brands, to talk about what makes this franchise a standout in the plumbing world. We'll cover everything from their strong brand reputation and top-tier operational support to the type of owner who really thrives in this business. This is a franchise I keep an eye on for candidates who want to scale big. I'm talking about the kind of person who can build a strong team, create a winning culture, and isn't afraid to roll up their sleeves and lay the foundation for long-term success. And here's the thing, skilled trades are producing a new class of millionaires. While tech and finance still get a lot of spotlight, more and more plumbing and home service business owners are building 7 and even 8-figure businesses. It's a serious path to wealth, especially for those who get in and do it right. Let's jump into it. So hello, Tommy, how are you? And welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah. Hi, Laura. I'm doing well. Thank you. I appreciate the ability to spend a little time with you today.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could just give a background on how you got into franchising in general, and then, what led your path to joining Authority Brands with Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah, my background prior to being in franchising was in marketing. I was a senior director for an advertising group, 5, 6, 7 years in advertising. So dating myself there a little bit. Worked with regional and local clients on, advertising programs, and then got into franchise development about 6 or 7 years ago. I've been here with Authority Brands and Ben Franklin for a little over 4 years now. So kind of a second career, but works hand in hand with, the marketing and business development that I was doing prior.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about the branding for Benjamin Franklin. I think is so interesting. The reliability, the punctuality. I mean, it is unique. Everybody's going to remember that name, but yeah, let's talk a little bit about that.
I get a lot of questions about that. People say, well, I didn't know Ben Franklin was a plumber. It's like, well, he wasn't a plumber. He was famous for the saying, time is money. Mm-hmm. So the branding was built around punctuality. The survey, when they created this brand, said the number one pain point a consumer has when they're calling a home service contractor is the time element. So everybody's had that, we'll be there at a certain time, and you take off from work and you've been sitting here all day and nobody's called or showed up. And it's definitely a frustration. So the branding was built, Benjamin Franklin, the punctual plumber. If there's any delay, it's you we pay. And so we guarantee you we're going to be on time for our service call. And if we're not, we'll refund you $5 for every minute we're late, up to $300 maximum. So I always tell people in this very cluttered world of rooters, right? You got the rescue rooter and the rooter man and the Mr. Rooter and the rotor rooter, very difficult to distinguish themselves. Mm-hmm. Ben Franklin, we are sticking out like a sore thumb and attacking that punctuality piece. So it's actually a pretty cool story behind the brand name.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
And are you guys now, I don't know, have the exact number, over 350 locations, or what number are you up to?
Yeah, so it was up in the 380s now as of 2025. So steady growing.
Fantastic. And I think a modest, relatively compared to some franchises, a very reasonable investment for certainly the return you're getting. And that I think averaging in the 200 some odd range, but 130, 274, I don't know what the new FDD might show, but.
Yeah. Those FDDs, they always have the big range in there. So it's like, what's the real number? I always tell people, if you're coming into this business as an outsider, you don't have, facilities and vehicles, and, you're more of just an entrepreneur coming in, you generally can expect an initial investment in the ballpark of, say, $200,000 for a 1 territory, 2 truck start. Do 2 territories, so you double the size of the market you're attacking, which is common. You see it in, the 250 range. And that's inclusive of working capital, 3 months worth of variable expenses and all their one-time expenses. So it's kind of a turnkey dollar figure.
Gotcha. And I'm sure everybody's question is, I don't know anything about plumbing. How in the world can I run a plumbing franchise? And more importantly, how can I even be legally able to run a plumbing franchise because I'm not licensed? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So believe it or not, the majority of the people we put in this system, it's around 75% have no plumbing or no trades backgrounds. And believe it or not, they generally do a better job scaling than the tradespeople just because they're more business people that focus on business scaling and not necessarily the technical piece. The licensing always trips people up. Well, don't I have to be a licensed plumber? Well, yeah, sure, if you want to be a plumber, but I'm looking for an owner of a plumbing company, not a plumber. So the owner of the business does not have to be licensed. We're just going to employ people that are licensed. So sometimes that gets a little bit, people get confused there. It's not a challenge to hire licensed plumbers. They're easily out there. When people talk to startups or validators, they hear people say, "Yep, no, I was able to hire people without really any difficulty whatsoever." So I mean, you and I could probably spend 20 minutes talking about hiring and licensing, but it's definitely something we have support around. Being part of Authority Brands and as big as we are, it gives us the ability to provide an awful lot of infrastructure for our startup. So for example, we will run advertising in markets where we're putting franchises. And so it's recruitment in nature, video, display advertising. We're targeting experienced, licensed tradespeople. We're targeting military transitions, trade schools, community colleges, people in supply and distributor type roles that can slide over into trades and make a lot more money. People see that advertisement, they end up going into a dedicated landing page that we have corporately where all of our franchise job postings are in there, and they have the ability to, apply through the portal. So I always tell folks we average about 5,500 applications every single month nationwide through that portal for our 3 trades companies. So you will not hear anybody give you a lot of, they'll say, yeah, it was very easy to hire individuals. That was not a difficulty. Now, I always tell people I'd be painting probably a 2 rows of a picture if I said it's easy to hire good people, so you'll always hear the startups talk about, we went through a couple of guys in our first 6 months till we found people that would do it to the standard that I wanted it done. Right. But as far as like putting individuals in seats, believe it or not, relatively easy to do, and you'll hear that from all of the startup owners that you'll have opportunity to talk to.
How do the successful owners build that culture where those folks want to stay and develop over time and increase their skills, I guess?
Yeah, that piggybacks kind of off your last question. People say, well, what type of skill sets or traits make good owners here? And I always say, I think there's 3 things that I commonly see, but one of them is what I call a non-negotiable, and that's team builders. So the beauty of this industry a lot of times is there's more demand for the service than there is supply. So if you picked up your telephone in your local market and you started calling a plumber and saying, "Can you come to my house today?" You're gonna strike out, right? You're gonna find they don't answer the phone. They're booked out for 2 or 3 days. So generally, we're rolling on day one just because we're meeting supply shortage there with our offering. So guys that do really well at team building and building, you mentioned culture. That's the key word, right? Create a culture that attracts and retains talent. I always say there's a little bit of an asterisk in there in that they got to have a blue collar DNA strand in their body somewhere.
Good point.
They're all white collar people, probably wearing slacks and a golf shirt, but I just say they have the ability to walk into their facility and relate to their team, right? So there's a little bit of I call it a blue collar down to earthness to these people that they can relate to their workforce is kind of how I describe it. The other things that you see that are certainly, that piece is not, I guess it's teachable, but it's not. So I always say, that's why I say it's kind of the non-negotiable. You either kind of born like that or you're not, right? The other ones that you see, there's definitely like an operational or logistics component to it. So you're talking about, trucks in the field, call taking, dispatching, warehousing. So you're managing to a lot of analytics and KPIs. You're trying to drive efficiencies and margins. And the other piece a lot of people don't realize is plumbers are commissioned employees. So when you get in a house, you're not doing outbound cold calling because you can't knock on doors and say, "Can I fix your plumbing today?" But when we get in the house, we're definitely cross-selling or upselling or trying to close the job. So people who understand how to manage in a sales dynamic where we're looking at analytics again and hey, this plumber's converting at a 2-to-1 ratio to this guy. So we've got a training issue here and we can identify that and address it. So it's those types of skill sets that really make the best owners. The technical piece, we're just going to hire it. So you don't need to have any technical knowledge. We'll just hire that out.
So there's training wrapped around helping those plumbers that have the technical skill, how to learn how to properly sell,
Yeah,
the people
100%. So one of the biggest differentiators for us compared to other plumbing franchises or just any franchise in general is we own some affiliate companies that are designed to support our concepts. One of the companies that we own is called Success Academy, and it's a training organization that trains trades franchises. So our three trades franchises. The easiest way to describe it is if I said that every job in your organization has curriculums built out. So maybe it's a GM or an ops manager, maybe it's a call taker or dispatcher, or maybe it's a plumber. This training can be sometimes self-paced, computer-based training. Sometimes it's online, webinars, instructors. Sometimes you go to them. Sometimes they come to you. But if it's a plumber, yeah, technical training, but you mentioned the sales piece. So they go through a 2-day course called Blended Service Core. And that is everything from, how do I park a truck? How do I greet and engage a customer? How do I walk them through a diagnosis and solution to their problem? How do I quote pricing? How do I overcome objections? And then once they're done with that class, they move into something called advanced plumbing sales, which would be how do I take somebody from, tank to tankless on a water heater upgrade, or maybe sell something like a whole home water filtration system. So these entrepreneurs that are coming in that say, well, I don't really understand that. How do I train when I don't understand? I'm like, I don't need you to train. I just need you to sign you and your team up for training, and my team is going to train that. And all of that's part of the franchise. So in other words, you can sign people up for hundreds, thousands of classes. It's all part of the franchise. There's no, a la carte fees on top of any of that. It's just something that we provide for our system.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. And so you talked about some different services in terms of the product offerings. I know you do some private labeling, I believe. And
yeah.
So not just repairs and plumbing, but some other products that you install.
Yeah, we're by far the largest in terms of average gross revenue of franchises in the plumbing space. And a lot of questions say, well, what are you guys doing that differentiates you, right? We talked about the brand name being one of them. The private label product piece is another differentiator. We're the only people going to market in this space with that private label product offering. So to give you some examples of that, the number one seller is a whole home water filtration system that we do in partnership with Brita. So it's manufactured by Brita. Everybody knows that name. But when it goes in the house, it's Ben Franklin private label. So I tell folks, you can't get price shopped on it. You got a better margin. And then the beauty of that product is once a year, we're coming out to your house and we're swapping out the cartridges. So we start to build a little bit of a relationship there. So when you do have that plumbing need down the road, we're more likely to get that call because of that private label product dynamic. But that private label product line extends to water heaters, expansion tanks for water heaters. There's water softeners systems in there, whole home leak detection, garbage disposals. We even have a drain cleaning solution called BioBin. So it's a pretty comprehensive offering that we have in that space.
Wow. In terms of the mix or the way franchisees find clients, is it mostly residential? Is it a combination?
Yeah. There's no, I tell people we're by definition residential, light commercial, service, repair, and install. So what does that mean? I don't do construction, and we don't specialize in what I would call like large scale industrial or commercial. So I'm not going into downtown and spending a year repiping a high rise. You'll hear the owners say in the commercial space, I just like to stay as transactional as possible. So by meaning light commercial, meaning I can get in there, I can get the work done, I can get paid, and I can get out. I'm not working on, long-term projects where I'm dealing with bid work and float and payroll and things like that. But there's no restrictions. And you do see some owners do get into a little bit of that project work. But as a rule, they're trying to stay as transactional as possible and not run any type of accounts receivable. But in that space, I tell folks, we'll do everything. We're a full service plumbing company. There's some niche companies out there, but we'll do any type of service, repair, and install work. We will do basic remodel work. We'll repipe houses. We'll do gas lines. We'll do water filtration systems, water softening systems. We do septic. We do sewer repairs and replacement. So we're going to pretty much run the gamut in that plumbing space.
And so in terms of helping franchisees find customers, what is the marketing that works, and what do you do versus what they need to do?
Yeah, back to being part of Authority Brands again, we have a program that we call the Sure Start program. So it's a dedicated team of individuals that works exclusively with startups. We do not dump you in the general population. There's a marketing manager that you are with for your first 9 months that is exclusively focused on startup businesses. At the end of the 9 months, you still have a marketing manager. It's just there'll be a little bit of a handoff there because we've got you, stable at that point. But the marketing manager is going to help you with everything from a planning and implementation standpoint. You'll be meeting with them on a weekly basis at startup, looking at inbound lead flow, conversion ratios. You're going to hear them talk about we're going to feed what leads, right? So this tactic may be working a little bit better in this market. Let's bump that budget and let's pull this one back a little bit because it's not really performing. So it's not necessarily a cookie cutter program, but the way I describe it is pretty much any tool or asset that you would ever need for marketing, we already have built out. So if it's a digital tactic, anything from like SEM, SEO, social media, Angie's List, Thumbtack, Yelp, direct mail campaigns, email campaigns, even down to, radio, billboard, or TV campaigns that are all developed. So it's just a matter of plug and play in the applicable assets at the right time. A lot of it's digital at start. When we're a startup, we only got a couple trucks. We're not really invested in mass media because that's kind of overkill. So a lot of the startup, you're going to see Google AdWords, you're going to see LSA type tactics. You'll see, like I say, the Angie's List, the Thumbtacks of the world, and things like that. So a lot of the lead gen out of the gate.
Great. And do you do a lot of owners also network, and do they find that
Yeah.
useful?
Locally, the things that you're doing, I tell people the things locally I can't help you with. I need you to join the Chamber of Commerce. I need you to go to the BNI meetings or the mastermind groups. We talk about being visible in the community. Not sure the softball team or the fun run. Some great low cost, no cost tactics would be identifying things like property management associations, realtor associations, home inspectors. Old tactic would be, find out where they meet, buy them lunch, and, drop off a ton of business cards. And those guys are always looking for plumbers to service properties or facilities that they're working on. So those are some great, like just local, no cost tactics that you can use to drum up some business as well.
When someone onboards, what is the process typically like? They go through the discovery process with you, which takes a couple months, but when they onboard,
Sure Start program I was talking about, the way I tell people to envision that would be about 16 weeks from the day you sign to the day we're rolling service calls. And just envision, 160 items on a checklist that we have to handle. You'll have a project manager called your Sure Start coordinator that you'll be meeting with at least once a week. And you're kind of systematically working through this, onboarding process. First parts of it, it's things like facility, licensing, vehicles, procurement. We're getting a lot of that stuff percolating in the background. Middle phases, we're doing things like competitive market research, price books, budget build out, marketing build out, software training. We're getting jobs posted on the back end. We're getting those initial hires. We're training, we're soft launch marketing, and we're rolling. So this project manager's got you from day one all the way through opening. And then they will pull in other members of that Sure Start program. We already talked about the marketing manager. There's a procurement specialist. Guy's name's Patrick Anderson. Patrick's going to work with you on all your initial vendor setup and procurement. There's a software trainer that's involved. There's a field ops trainer that's involved. And all these people are going to kind of systematically walk you through the opening.
So when someone opens, typically what's their team look like? Who do they have?
It depends on their bandwidth. I get asked all the time semi-absentee, and that's a 4-letter word to me because I think semi-absentee can be defined about, 20 different directions, right? So the way I describe it to candidates is I say, you'll always see somebody start with a minimum of 2 plumbers and 2 trucks, just because if you start with one and the guy quits or you fire him, we're dead in the water. So at least 2. I see some more capitalized individuals will start with 3 sometimes. The piece that's the non-negotiable is that call taking dispatching piece. So you have to answer the phones live in real time. If you don't answer, people just hang up, they call the next plumber on the list. So some owners who say, you know what, I am a hands-on individual, full-time, I'm diving in, this is my baby. A lot of times you will see them answer phones, dispatch, run their offices, manage their team, just because it's A, their way of learning the business, and B, saves a little money because I'm not having to hire support staff out of the gate. The other way I see that tackled would be you have some individuals say, yeah, you know what, I'm not going to do that, right? I'm not a in the weeds type of guy or gal. And so you typically see them hire an office manager out of the gate. And then that office manager probably does things like call taking, dispatching, a lot of administration, frees them up from the day to day. Obviously, we're going to need to bake that salary into the initial investment. And then you'll kick to like a call center on nights and weekends
That was my next
to make
question.
sure that you've got year-round service. So that's typically the way I see it started as, like full-time or or you and an office manager. Every once in a while, you've got some very highly capitalized individuals who are looking to be very aggressive in a marketplace, and you may see them go out and hire like a full-time GM or a full-time ops manager on day one. Now, those people are definitely looking to be more behind the scenes, right, when they do that. And that obviously increases the initial investment because a GM or an ops manager is going to be a lot more than an office manager. But you do see that from time to time in some situations.
What's scaling look like? I mean, when does someone
Yeah.
know when they need to add the next truck, et cetera?
As soon as you're having to tell people I can't get to you for, a couple of days, because what's happening is you're kind of losing customers because people will start dialing around trying to find somebody that can come quicker than you is what happens. So my better franchises in year one, they seem to do, let's just say in the neighborhood of like 900,000 annual on average. And what that typically looks like is, 2 trucks up at start. A lot of them in that realm will have a third truck up somewhere mid-year, like 4 to 6 months in, they'll have a third truck up. And a lot of times by you're wrapping around that 12th month, they'll have, say, like a fourth truck up. They'll probably have hired like an apprentice or two, so a trainee that they've got in there for future expansion development. They've definitely put some type of, office manager or manager in place for the day-to-day at that point. The ones that don't scale well at startup, they tend to hover down more in that like $400,000 range. And a lot of times what's happening there is they don't ever get that third truck or that fourth truck up. They seem to hover. Sometimes they're bad people managers.
Right.
So they have a really hard time attracting and retaining talent because nobody wants to work for them. And then, as you know, in franchising, sometimes people fall into that trap of buying themselves a job. And so they get in there and it's just like, we're working, 80 hours a week and we need to hire and step back and delegate. And you say, well, Tommy, that's common sense. But as you know, that's harder. That, easier said than done for some individuals. Right. That's why it comes down to that team building aspect. It's like, really the ones that get that third truck and that fourth truck up are the ones that start stacking and scaling, and you see like a lot of success out of them.
Do you see when we think about territories, so franchises have defined territories, is there an average number when it's fully mature, that average number of trucks you have in a territory versus to when you need to own more territories?
Yeah, I get a lot of questions about that. Like the guys that start with 2 territories or 3 territories, go faster than guys with 1 territory. And what about if we're, have a presence in a market or don't have a presence in a market? So I always tell people, first thing is presence in market, no presence in market. You don't really see any differentiation there. I could take a startup, butt them up against my largest franchise in the system. In theory, you would think they're going to go quicker because there's a brand presence there. But we could take somebody and stick them, first one in a state, and they seem to go at the same pace. Because I think it's back to that demand element, right? Like a lot of people don't have a plumber because the average house only uses it once every 3 years, and so people are just trying to find somebody that can
average.
Right. So it's like, so we do see that the multi-territory people. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. There's a guy in Hot Springs, Arkansas that does over $3 million in revenue. So you can build a heck of a business in a rural community. He outperforms people in major metros sometimes just because, it's back to the operator and he's just really good at what he does. So, but I mean, the average Ben Franklin that's out there is about a $3 million business, and that's about a 6 to 8 truck operation. Generally has a full-time ops manager, a full-time office manager, a full-time call taker, dispatcher. And then you generally see, our clients sitting in that GM or owner chair, working more on strategic direction. That's just kind of the average guy is how I describe it. Yep.
And do the average number of owners coming on, do they tend to own a couple territories?
Yeah. Everybody, most people start with 2. Every once in a while, people that have that capital is a little bit tight, then sometimes it's like, well, hey, let's maybe just start with 1. Let's keep the cash close to the vest, and maybe let's add that second one, once we get our feet underneath you a little bit. But even the guys that add 2, it's very common for them to be adding a territory about 12 months in. So it's typically like a spoke and hub type mentality. Let's start, let's get going, let's get, a couple territories in, and then let's just kind of start building out. I mean, everybody wants to build an empire, but yeah, you get into some of the bigger ones that are like in a major city, like a San Francisco or a Dallas or a Minneapolis or a, Phoenix. I mean, you see guys in there that'll have, 8 territories, 10 territories, 15 territories, get really large. I mean, it's achievable in big markets like that. The biggest guy in the system does close to 18 million in revenue. So he's probably like a 45 truck operation
Wow.
out in the Bay Area in California. And then you see a lot of guys that are in that, 8, 9, $10 million range that are, your first quartile guys. They have a propensity to be like in larger metro areas, and they're running, like 20 truck operations or something like that. So we do see that quite common, for our first quartile guys. Yeah.
Wow. What kind of space then do you send the trucks home with the plumbers, or do most
Yeah,
people
I get asked that all the time. So as a rule, the plumbers take the trucks home. That way they can be on their first call at 8 a.m., direct from the house. Now, do you let the new hire take the truck home? No, most of them tell you they got to go through like a 60-day or a 90-day probationary period. And then the question everybody says, well, what about theft? And what you'll hear the owners tell you is that's actually designed to deter theft, right? Because if we do have a theft issue, they're only breaking into one truck. If we got 20 trucks parked on a lot overnight, somebody can break into 20 trucks at once. So yeah, that's actually designed to deter theft, not create a theft problem. So, but yeah, they
right?
take them out to the house. Yeah.
Is
Not a
and
big footprint real estate wise. We do about the guideline, is probably about 1,000 square feet for every million in revenue generated. I mean, obviously, once you get into those bigger guys, that rule doesn't hold. So most of the startups are starting at about a 2,000 square foot facility on average. It's a plumbing building. So I always say cheap, functional, storing some equipment, storing some inventory, office and meeting space, but nobody's going to come out and pass or fail yet. It's a plumbing building. It's not customer facing. We'll just, we'll make it work is how I describe it.
what is the targeted spend on marketing to get into that $3 million business?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to hear some ranges from customers, but I think if from clients or franchises, but if you just pulled any P&L in the Ben Franklin system and averaged them, I think you'd see about a 10.5% line item on a P&L. I mean,
Yeah,
that is one of your
that,
larger expenditures.
sure.
I've heard it as high as like 14 from a franchise that's like aggressively scaling, like literally doubling their revenue. And I've heard it down in the single digits for guys who are very developed and,
Mm-hmm.
on autopilot to some degree. They've got
Mm-hmm.
tons of repeat business built in, but you definitely as a startup going to expect to see that in like that 10.5, 12.5% range.
Do
So
most
we'll
owners?
typically say about 6,000 to 8,000 a month on
Okay.
average for a startup, depending on
Okay.
the market. Is what we're going to typically recommend,
That
somewhere in that
makes
range.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
A lot of sense. I mean, that's some big revenue you're going after. So that's yeah, it's very
Yeah.
reach.
And if you do
Yeah.
the math on that, that's 10.5 to 12.5% of two trucks being booked out in full is kind of the rationale behind that expenditure.
Okay. Do you find most owners are hanging on to their franchises and passing it down, or are they looking to do that big multiple? I mean, these businesses can sell for large, or is it other franchisees that
Yeah.
would tend to buy them up? How does that,
I get asked
or
about
is there private?
resales all the time. We rarely, in my 4 years that I have been here, I've only seen outsiders come into the system twice. And in both instances, it was very large private equity group who
Mm-hmm.
basically bought out the state of Florida,
Right.
and then a big private equity group that bought out a very large, like tri-branded owner in Pennsylvania. Most of the franchises will sell internally. So we do have numerous individuals who work in a multi-state footprint. So, for example, I've got a Ben Franklin. The man lives in Colorado, but he owns Ben Franklin in Colorado. He owns it in Phoenix. He owns it in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I would tell you if you had a really good one for sale somewhere, he would definitely entertain a conversation in purchasing it. So a lot of the times they get bought up internally before I ever even find out that they're on the market. And then you definitely see some generational type pass downs for sure when you have, the kids coming up and taking over. That's very common.
Well, that's a true sign of a strong franchise, in my opinion,
Yeah.
is when you just
Yes.
don't see those, that they're getting gobbled up immediately. And we talked a bit about the ideal owner and the team builder, team player, but any other common traits, or do you have people with all various backgrounds?
Yeah, I always tell, engineers and, people coming out of like blue collar type spaces, veterans, a
Yeah,
huge number of veterans are in this system and do very, very well. There's things out there that, restaurants, believe it or not. We have a lot of people come from restaurants and that's generally a head scratcher. And I always say, well, if you think about it, it's similar. Restaurants all about managing a team, right? And it's all about
sure.
operational management and tons of moving parts and driving efficiencies and coordination. So I'm like, it's a very logical transition over, you're just swapping the product out, right? So I have seen that, believe it or not. A lot of times, Laura, it's just an entrepreneur looking for like what's next. Some of the recent ones have been individuals that like owned a independent insurance agency and they sold it. It was kind of like, what's next, right? It's like a serial entrepreneur. I owned a
Right.
home health business and I built it and I sold it. And it's like, what's next? And so they're just attracted to the industry, the scalability and the stability of
Yes.
it. So it's like a
Yes.
what's next thing. But I've seen them come from, school teacher, IT consultant, web designers. But it goes back to that. They always have that team building,
Yeah.
people management
That's helpful.
DNA is how I
Right.
describe it.
Right.
And
And
I've had
that's
people ask on validation calls, well, what's it like managing a plumbing company? Like you don't know anything about plumbing. And I had a guy, he came out of restaurants and he said, you ever take a new job and the first couple months you just were kind of like, woo, because they're using acronyms you don't understand. And it's just a little bit of
oh
your
yeah.
head spin. He goes, but then after a couple months, it was like, you got it. He goes, it felt
Really?
like that. He goes,
Yeah.
it really wasn't that big of a deal. Like I just learned it fairly quickly. And I was like, that's a great analogy because I definitely have shifted careers midstream. I remember that feeling of like, oh, wow, like I don't really understand what I'm doing here, but I learned it in a couple of months, right? It was really quick. And that's to do what we tell you and you're going to be fine. And I actually said that. He said he was a product manager at a tax software company. He goes, I don't know what half this stuff y'all are telling me to do means. I'm just doing it because you're telling me to do it. And I'm like, and that's why you're scaling as fast as you are. You don't buy a McDonald's and debate them on how to cook a hamburger. You just follow the
Right.
system, right? Yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I imagine that fear, you got to be afraid some employees at the beginning may try to pull a fast one on you if you don't
Yeah.
know what you're doing. And you've got to have I think, some type of partner that knows something, or at least an employee that you can really trust that knows that technical side, right? It's that,
Well, I mean,
or how's that work?
so I say yes. So plumbing, for some reason, plumbing gets held to a standard different than other home service concepts. So I just say if you buy a painting franchise and the guy who knows how to paint the houses quits, unless you're going to go get on the ladder and paint the house, what are you going to do? You're just going to hire another guy that knows how to paint houses, right? Plumbing is the same thing. If the guy that knows how to do plumbing leaves, we're just going to hire a different plumber. In the situation you're talking about, I mean, it's not common, but it does happen. I had a female owner in North Carolina. She had hired her license holder, week one, fairly easy. Before she opened, unfortunately, it was a bad hire. And the gentleman tried to shake her down for money. And he was just kind of like, you're going to need to pay me more. I'm going to leave. And, you're not going to have a licensed plumber. And you know what she did? She said, you're fired.
Yeah. Good.
And he said, well, hang on a second, let's talk about it. And it was like, no, get out. And then she just hired somebody else the next week. So it's no different than any other business that's out there. But yes, for some reason, before people talk to you and me, or even when people are talking to you and me, they want to hold plumbing to a different standard when the reality is it's just not,
Yeah.
it's no
Understandable.
different.
No, that makes sense. Any other important point? I mean, we talked some on the amazing support of authority brands. You talked through some of the programs you offer. Any other highlights you want to offer? Because that
I
is
always talk a
huge.
little bit about the industry just because, people that always start out with saying, hey, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you didn't wake up this morning with a lifelong dream of owning a plumbing company, right? So let me tell you why you would get into something like this. And it checks almost every box entrepreneurs are typically looking for. And what I mean by that is whatever you want to call it, recession resistant, pandemic resistant, AI resistant is going to be the new word, right? When the
Mm-hmm.
water heater doesn't heat, the toilet doesn't flush, it's getting fixed. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. So it's as stable gets. One of the beauties of plumbing is there's no seasonality to it. So
Right.
a lot of these home service concepts during winter months, you'll start to see them try and supplement revenue with holiday lighting or things like that. But plumbing has an equal revenue opportunity across all 12 months. It makes it, very, very attractive. It's
Mm-hmm.
also a cash-based business in that, like I said, we're taking cash, check, or credit card at time of service. We're not dealing with insurance. We're not dealing with, having to file government paperwork to get reimbursed on something. So you're not running any type of receivables or invoicing, which is very attractive. A lot of people are very adverse to cold calling. So again, we're plumbing repair. We can't go knocking on doors saying, can I
Right.
fix your plumbing? So it's a lot of direct to consumer marketing. And then what you're doing is you're selling in the house in the form of upselling or cross-selling, but people are generally comfortable with that. It's just that flat cold calling solicitation that people are adverse to. And so this doesn't have that. You don't compete with e-commerce, right? It's got the scalability factor. It's the low investment. It checks all the boxes. And so a lot of times when I'm talking to people, they're kind of like, I came into this with really low expectations, but you got my wheels turning all of a sudden. And people say, well, what's the downside? And I just say, it's plumbing. It ain't sexy. You know what I'm saying? It ain't
Yeah.
sexy. If you're a
Yeah.
vanity person, this maybe ain't for you, but
Right. But if you
always
want to build
before cool is what I always say.
that's awesome. I really appreciate your time today, Tommy. This has been very, very enlightening. Great information about I think a quality franchise that anybody would be happy to own. I think if you got those skills, we have those skills.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate the time. It's always
Yeah.
great to see you.
All right. You take care.
Thanks, Laura.
That's a wrap for this episode of Franchise Focus. I hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. If you're thinking about franchise ownership or want to learn more about the brands we discuss, connect with me on LinkedIn or visit my website at blackmorefranchiseconsulting.com or just leave a comment. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, and share it with someone. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on Franchise Focus.